Hi, this is Anna Imagination with a Healing Garden, and this is part 3 of a thing I'm doing right now. I got on this morning because the universe and I are kind of having a thing right now. And when I got on to try and explain our situation, I realized you need context. And I have one of those stories where if you give a mouse a cookie, so, well, you don't know this until you know this, and you can't know this until you know this. So I had to go back to the beginning. And the universe has been telling me for a very long time now, tell your story. Tell your story. It's very annoying. Tell your story. So I started podcasting and I did my thing, and there was a lot of reasons why I started up my podcast. And she just kept saying, tell your story. And I did. I would go into it and I would try telling it, and it was terrible every time. This is the first time I've gotten it right. This is probably my 8th attempt at telling you my story. I needed to tell it from the 9th perspective. When we go through life and we think about writing our own memoir, do it. Oh, absolutely do it. You will find yourself. You're going to have that moment where you go, oh, it's just that I tried and I want to get to it. It's because you're not in the right perspective yet. You have to wait to be in the right perspective before you can tell your own story. The 5th perspective. The 5th perspective. Do it. And then I wasn't able to communicate or articulate anything until I got to the 9th perspective. Now I can finally tell my story. I can tell the second half. My story has 2 halves. It actually has 3 parts. It has the abuse stage, the first 20 years of my life. And then it has the I was owned by husbands stage. And then the 3rd stage is my rebirth when I escaped to New York. Escape to New York. And I did escape to New York, which is where I am now. Escape to New York. Oh yeah, escape to New York. So in the first video, I explained how I ended up with multiple personality disorder, and the conditioning that occurred to me was literally equivalent to what we see in the musical Tommy by The Who. They did that to me. And I walked away only with my ability to manifest, the universe on my side, and my brain. I was fucking smart. I was a white female who was smart in a white supremacist society. And rule number 1 is the woman can never be smarter than the man. So they assumed I was stupid. So when they told me all the things I shouldn't be that day, they forgot to address my intelligence. They left that intact. So I was able to build this massive, I was able to get the hell out of Dodge. In the second half of my story, it's all about how I realize that I always get whatever I want. And if I want to be smart like Sherlock Holmes, I will be. So I manifested intelligence, education. I manifested knowledge. And what I ended up doing when I manifested was I actually manifested the motivation. I want you to really take what I just said, because that's it. Manifest the motivation. When I talk to you later about manifestation, we're going to be covering this. So when you manifest, really think about manifesting your own motivation. I see manifestation like no one else does. When you manifest your motivation, you can literally drive yourself in any direction you want to go. I had agendas. Now, when I was raped on 9/11, that really was a setback. I had learned at that point lessons, beliefs like it wasn't safe to tell a man no. It wasn't safe to speak. It wasn't safe to be myself. It wasn't safe to engage with people. Those are the lessons I learned. So when my first husband stepped in, and I do not iron out these details, I do not want to hash out all of the marital details. I don't do that. He was a vulnerable narcissist who had a trigger of becoming a narcissist, and the kind of narcissist he was verbally abusive, and he literally locked me up on the days that he couldn't control me. I was locked in bathrooms, I was locked in bedrooms. He would barricade the door and stand in front of it. I have had 4 owners in my entire life. The first 2 owners were the rapists. The first one literally kept me with chains. The second one used psychological enslavement, Stockholm Syndrome. And he used psychology against me as a weapon. That enslavement would not end unless and until I could best him in logic and best him in psychology. I had to best him in knowledge. I had to be smarter than my wardens. My warden was fucking smart. At 15, I was trying to out-lawyer a 45-year-old man living in New York City with a degree in psychology, music, and law. I found one of the most educated predators on the planet, and he enslaved me, strategically blackmailing me, strategically awarding me so that I would get an adrenaline rush while I orgasmed. He used my subconscious mind against me in literal subconscious warfare. That is how good I had to get to escape. You have to become smarter than your warden. And my warden was a fucking genius. At 21 years old, I was finally able to out-logic him with my argument, the Rorschach print perspective. When I dropped the Rorschach print perspective on him and proved that his truths are in fact just his opinions, and that my opinions were no better or different or worse than his opinions, but that everything he said to me was just flouting his opinion. Oh, he screamed. And I laughed and said, and that's your opinion. And then he laughed at me again, and he screamed and screamed. And he said all of the narcissistic things that I had been hearing for 5 years, and I could identify them. And then I said, and that's your opinion. Over and over. He had no power over me. Because the power he held over me was my understanding and believing that what he said was fact. That's the toxic belief that is the key right there. That's Stockholm Syndrome. They embed that belief inside of your brain, and you have Stockholm Syndrome. Every mental illness has a belief, just like this one. It is the belief that everything your captor says to you is fact. Once you realize that it's not fact, once you identify that toxic belief, and it's the same in everybody, it's unanimous, because Thank God! The subconscious mind is a machine. It's not an identity. It's not different. It's not unique. Every person with Stockholm Syndrome, do you have that belief in your head? Do you believe that the person you fear is right, has fact, speaks truth? Do you believe them? That is the toxic belief they embedded into your fear system to alter your personality, to enslave you, to create an invasive perspective in addition to your own. Now, depending upon which one is stronger and how much identity is suppressed, is going to determine if you are completely on board with their invasive perspective or if you're toggling the line and you're fighting back. I fought back. Every 3 weeks, like clockwork. Identity could only be suppressed for 3 weeks. When you fight on a regular cycle, that is how long your identity can be suppressed before she tries again. So if you're someone who picks a fight every 2 weeks to 4 weeks, it isn't your menstrual cycle, ladies. That is societal gaslighting. That is misogynistic garbage. It is your identity being suppressed under Stockholm Syndrome, fighting the subconscious mind. What's your calendar? What's your calendar? At that time in my life, it was 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks. Every fucking 3 weeks. And they had me thinking it was my menstrual cycle. And then it became every 2 weeks. And then it became every week. I am now down to every 7 to 10 days. And I can tell you what it is. It is the misalignment of your perspective to identity. So identity's here, and your perspective is doing this. And every X amount of period, she goes, okay, I can't handle it anymore. It's too out of alignment. So you need to do a realignment. You have to go back through your conscious mind and confirm that everybody is on the same page and that your perspective lines up to your identity and your ethics. It's more complicated if you have a romantic partner, and I also break that down. Link below, talk to me. I will cover everything I've got with you. When I realized that he was wrong, just like that, the Stockholm Syndrome released. But I had just been raped on 9/11. It was my city under fire. It's my home. I lived in a place where people didn't care about 9/11. There's the people who live here when it happened, people. And then there's the people who, with their hearts, live here as it happened. And then there's people who know of New York City. It's that place over there with whom this happened. And then there's people who actually hate New York City or New York or New Yorkers that had this happen to them. But one reality is true. It happened to America. So every America felt it. But it felt different for the people in Washington and New York City and Pennsylvania. It really felt different for people in New York City. It felt different for people in New York. Because in New York, you hear about shit happening in New York City and you go, yeah, something else happened in New York City again. And then it's your home. And then it's people looking at it on their way to work. or its children sitting in their apartment watching it unfold before their eyes because they live in the apartment complexes in that area. It's being told that you had to go home from school because shit's going down and you don't know what. It's being stuck on the FDR and looking up and seeing the smoke, and you're just staring there stuck in traffic, watching it unfold before your eyes. It's you having to go inside the buildings and pull out people. 9/11 is different here in New York City. It is the trauma that every person has inside of them here. Everyone here has the story. There's people who do not talk about it. There's people who just know. And then there's people who need to talk about it. I imagine it's what it felt like being in Pearl Harbor. How many people were actually at Pearl Harbor? They would understand the terror of 9/11 being in New York City. New York is my home. And I was raped on 9/11. So I became a mental mess. I became a shut-in. It started off with my husband's insecurities. He was a narcissist, and I was pretty, and he did not trust me. He was convinced I would cheat. I was very loyal to him. Too loyal. I purposely stayed trapped inside the house. I talked to no one. I had one friend. That one friend had to be approved by him. I was not allowed to work with men. I was not allowed to work more than a certain number of hours in case he wanted me home. At one point, I was on Zoloft, and when I told him I wanted to come off of Zoloft, he told me, no, I can actually handle you this way. So I was forced to stay on Zoloft for a year, in which time he denied me all medical care. I had several physical injuries and was not allowed to go to the hospital. My children would end up with injuries, and he would not let me take my children to the hospital. He superglued my children back to pieces sometimes. He did this while locking me in closets and bathrooms and bedrooms, or telling me who I could and couldn't talk to. My oldest daughter has memory of him beating me. I don't remember. I do not remember. If he did, I can't remember. In 2006, the pain was so severe that I started writing, and I realized that when I wrote, the pain stopped. It felt a lot better. So writing became my addiction. I realized that if I could write, I could pour it all out, and it would just come out of me. And then I started writing novels. I had conformed completely and fully to a proper white housewoman, living with a husband. I was living the American dream, exactly as my fathers and my grandfather and all of those men that day insisted I should. I just had to kill my identity in order to do it. I indulged in more education. I continued my pursuit of psychology, philosophy, geometry. And then I stepped into the Christianization of Europe and Rome for a long time. I did that for about 10 years, just studying how the Christianization unfolded. And then my marriage imploded. My next one began almost immediately. And 3 years later, I had an affair. And I scrambled for the psychology to figure out why. The reason why I could not figure out any of the psychology of what was wrong with me was because I had to shift a perspective to see it. So I had all the knowledge, but I required the perspective. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but it will mean nothing to you if you lack the perspective. You want to balance out your life with knowledge? You must first gain the right perspective. I was able to locate all of the right perspectives because I unlocked the skill of perspective shifting. That is what I do. I did not yet know this, though. I just had all the knowledge. My beautiful cat, my familiar, she died in 2013. Tribble was my soulmate, my familiar. She and I were trauma bonded because she was the cat my brother abused the most to get to me. When he wanted me to dance, he would beat Tribble. Tribble developed PTSD and severe behavioral disorders. That's when I started studying the psychology in animals and animal abuse. Tribble had absolute a codependent relationship with me. She with me and I with her. We both needed each other. We both shared the same abuse. We were trauma bonded. She died of mouth cancer in 2013. And when I lost Tribble, I lost my ground. That was the start of me losing my mind. In 2015, I had another affair. But this one was completely different. It drove me nuts. Couldn't figure out why it was different. But it was different. I later found out that the reason why it was different was because the first affair was an impulse urge from borderline personality disorder. The second affair, imagination fell in love. That's all. My alter, imagination, fell in love. But I would not yet know that I had multiple personality disorder, neither with my partner. The second affair happened in 2015. I had just finished my books and I was getting ready to publish them, so I was building an author platform. I was building my first company, Brain to Books at that time, and would get into marketing and everything business. It was a hobby. It was just a hobby at that time. It was giving me, a trapped housewife, something to do. So I created a business because I couldn't stand being completely consumed by my mental disorder. I was nested at that point and living in a bedroom, terrified to even cross the hall to use the bathroom. That's how bad the social anxiety was and the entrapment. My second husband was far worse than my first. He would line up my children and torture them, threatening to hit and beat each one of them, and the other two had to watch until they confessed their sins. I was too mentally insane to know what was going on. He would not allow me to talk to my children. He separated all of us. There was to be no communication between any of us. I lived upstairs in my room. We all had our own separate rooms, and his duty was literally walking around the house, making sure everyone stayed in their assigned place at all times. My youngest daughter would have to sneak out of her room to come find me. And if she caught me as one of my alters, depends on what she got. Multiple personality disorder is one of the ugliest, most horrific things you can imagine. Colin did not like my children. So if my daughter came in and it was Colin that greeted her, Colin was just cold, horribly neglectful. Joanna was loving, but really mentally ill. Imagination did not yet come out. Berrigan was out. Berrigan was all over the place, as Berrigan always is. Some days I'm still trying to figure out Berrigan. He's different than the others. And I'm still trying to figure out how he was different. I think there were two of them. I think he is my defense system, and he's my altar. So that I literally developed the personality of my own defense system. That's what imagination is. Imagination actually is my altar of identity. So when I'm imagination, I'm myself. Oh, my partner loves imagination. That's how I know he loves me. Because he saw me in my purest form, and he loved her the most. I should probably tell him that. That's why my name is Anna Imagination. Joanna Imagination. My God, it feels so good hearing the name Joanna again. Sometimes I wish people would call me that instead of Anna. My name is Joanna. It's been Joanna since I was 8 years old. My name is Joanna. I love my name. Joanna Imagination. That is my name. It's so funny because when I hear the name Joanna, I'm like, yes. I would tell my family. When I split, I told them, my name is Joanna. I told them, my name is Joanna. And they didn't even think about it. If my daughter came to me and said, Mom, call me this. Oh, I would be all over that in a heartbeat. Why? Why do you want me to call you that? In most cases, when we choose a different name for ourselves, a drastically different name, it's because we have multiple personality disorder. Because the name that you had identifies with a different identity, because you are developing a different conscious mind. There's a lot of little clues like that once you really dig into multiple personality, you start to see a lot of it. It's very common. It's the voices in our heads. There's a lot of multiples in this world, and they don't know it. But I can see multiples. They have their own energy to them even. We all have multiple personality disorder. We all have multiple personalities. It's not a disorder. It's not a disorder. Stop using the word disorder. It is a behavioral defense. That is the right word. And as we all know in manifestation, words matter. In 2015, I wanted to become a hermit. I announced that I was going to move to Ireland and quit the world. And I was just waiting for my youngest daughter to turn 18 so I could. And my then husband said, "Are you sure?" And I thought, this is pretty damn important. I have to make sure that this is what I want. So I sat down and I wrote an article. It wasn't enough. So I wrote another article. It was not enough. I went, oh, this is going to take some time. And I wrote. I wrote 90,000 words in 2 weeks, and when I was done, I called it Broken. It was a journal. It was me sitting down writing everything that happened to me in my life that I could remember from the fifth perspective. But I didn't know it was the fifth perspective then. It was me just sitting down and looking at everything that I had lived through. And I just stepped back from it and went, I need a doctor. I knew enough about psychology and philosophy that when I looked at that, I went, I need a doctor. I need a doctor. I needed a perspective shift. That's why you seek out a therapist. You're actually looking for perspective shifts. You need perspective shifts. But no one knows this because the words have not been invented yet. That's what I'm doing here. I am inventing the language you need so you can get better. Most of it is complete. Most of the language is done. It's on my podcast. It's amazing. I do a lot. Click on the link below. Click on the link below. Talk to me, and I'll go over everything I offer. I needed a perspective shift. I needed somebody to help me see because something was up. So I went to therapy. I trusted them. I did everything they said. And I got to see how fucking inadequate it was. To that point, April 2nd, 2015, that is when I went into therapy. I went to the ER and they evaluated me. And they diagnosed me with 44 separate PTSD triggers, suicidal ideation, chronic depression, bipolar 1, borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, codependency, anxious attachment, disorganized attachment style, Stockholm syndrome, psychological entrapment, narcissistic abuse syndrome. They told me that there were no cures, that I would have it for the rest of my life, that I would be on meds. I had manifestation, the universe, and my brain. And at that time, I had 20 years of philosophy, psychology, sociology, physics, mathematics, geometry, music, theory, frequency, linguistics in my head. There's no cure? Want to bet? I had already manifested the cure when I was 15 years old. I had already said, I want to know the cure to mental illness. In 2015, everything that I sought was coming to fruition. I set to work. I did everything they told me. My therapy very quickly turned into a very different kind of therapy. My therapy looked like this. I want to talk today about codependency, I would say to my therapist. And she would say, well, what about it? I want to go over exactly what causes it, what emotions it is, and where does it come from? Well, we don't know much about codependency. Tell me everything you know about it. She would say, I think you have black and white thinking. Let's talk about that, doctor. You tell me what black and white thinking is. Where does it come from? Why do we have it? What causes it? Well, we don't quite sure know what, they say that a lot. We don't know what causes it. Pain. I walk in and I said, tell me where pain comes from. I want to know what it is. Because when I stub my toe and it hurts, I can see the catalyst. Where is the catalyst with pain? Well, we don't know. This is my favorite day. Oh, I was pissed that day. I walked in and I just sat there and glared at her. And she went, oh shit, she researched more, she knows. And I just went, cognitive dissonance. Talk to me. And she went, what would you like to know? Why haven't you said it before now? A lot of people don't know what it is. Why aren't you educating them? Because we were told not to. By who? And she knew if I didn't tell her, I would just research this shit and find it myself. And then she would have to answer to me next week. Rule number one of a therapist, you have to maintain the trust. So I made all of my therapists answer for the incompetence of traditional therapy. Cognitive dissonance is an emotion. The emotion is misalignment. It is confusion. It is when you have conflicting perspectives inside of you. It creates an emotion called cognitive dissonance, which is really big psych talk for pain. The pain you feel is an emotion called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance comes from when you have a perspective that is not aligned to your identity, and or you have an invasive perspective inside of your cognitive core. This is what I invented inside Triadic healing. This language, these visions, the abstract concepts, the theories, so that I can take it and hand it to you and say, you need to know what's wrong, because this stuff is not known, because no one's been able to articulate it yet. In the 1970s, Dr. Graves, a psychologist, came very close. He created something called spiral dynamics, which is basically stage one of my perspective psychology. That is what triadic healing is. It is the study and the alignment of perspective, and how every mental illness stems from perspective, how toxic beliefs alter perspectives, how cognitive dissonance, emotional pain, comes from cognitive dissonance and a shift in perspectives that don't align. When you are in a partnership, emotional pain between the two of you when you have heartbreak is a slipping so that your perspectives are no longer aligned. Misunderstanding. When you misunderstand, you lose. Your vulnerability gets broken and damaged. When your vulnerability gets broken and damaged, you lose perspective with each other because you're separated by the misunderstanding that causes the pain. To mend it, this is how you fix relationships, people. To mend it, you have to see eye to eye and empathize on the pain so that you both realize that you suffer the same pain. And then your perspective is restored and you can see again because you are aligned in your perspective. I was not able to articulate any of that until now. But I could see it in 2015, 16, 17, 18. I just couldn't say it. So I made notes. Oh, did I take notes. I studied. I got back into philosophy. I went dark into psychology. I ripped it apart. And then in 2017, I realized how useless the psychology that I was being given was. I realized that my sessions were me using the therapists and the system, the therapy system, to collect data and information so I could tweak my own knowledge, because what they were doing was incompetent. Not the therapists. I loved my therapists. They're people. I'm talking about the system. My therapists legitimately were there because they wanted to help. All therapists usually are. But they are, unfortunately, working for a system that has an agenda. Because the system was built with one concept. How do we keep this self-sustained? How do you get a system that is self-sustained? That's what they wanted. They wanted to self-sustain the system. In order to do that, you have to subconsciously manipulate the people inside the system to obey a certain way so that they will sustain the system. That will guarantee its success over the centuries. This is the garbage that the Roman Empire thought up in the Council of Nicaea. And then they looked down and they plucked a little unknown religion called Christianity, and they tampered with it. They fucking tampered with it. And they embedded their little mechanism to rebrand the Roman Empire, completely condition the people using subliminal messaging strategically located so that the system they invented would remain self-sustainable so they wouldn't have to do the work for them. It's the same technique I use on my businesses that I learned from Rome. Rome did business differently than the rest of the world. My business methods are built on the ideas and the practices of the Holy Roman Empire because we know psychology. And that's what happens when you use psychology to harm people. They embedded a subliminal message inside of it. They are right. You want it self-sustaining. Absolutely. Most business owners will start a business and not think about making it self-sustaining. They'll just build the business and then do all the work until they exhaust themselves. No. To have it self-sustainable, you can do it ethically or unethically. Rome was unethical. So when I built the garden, I had to make sure that it was built in such a way so that it would sustain itself ethically. The system churns out unethical business practices all the time because it is an unethical business practice. If you want to study business with me, if you want to know how I run business, this is my third company. Go ahead and grab the link below. Talk to me, and we'll go over everything I offer. I used my therapy to find the holes in the system while I was also mastering the art of shifting perspectives. I was able to take my Rorschach print, expand on it. I started to break down the different parts of the psyche. I studied dreams. I took documented notes since I was 15 years old of my behavior. I went back on all my notes. I compared everything. I reread Broken for perspective. I watched my perspective shift from 5 to 6. And then I went back to read Broken, and I noticed the perspective shift. I wasn't done. I kept working. I still hadn't been able to use the word perspective. I still did not have that word. I could see it, I could feel it, but the words mattered. In 2019, I completely altered my healing around, not 2019, in 2017, I completely altered my healing around holistic medicine. And I noticed a significant difference. I took the cognitive behavioral therapy that I was taught and the grounding technique, and I applied them over with the holistic methods. My healing at that point went from night and day difference. It was extraordinary. I went back on my research, I pulled more information, and I studied the brain. I had friends who were neuroscientists, and I called them up and I interviewed them. I wanted to know exactly what happens in the brain when chemicals happen, when emotions happen, when pain happens, when pleasure happens. And I was a BDSM mistress. I wanted to know what happens in the brain when playing and pleasure happen. They told me everything. I had neuroscientists sitting down, breaking down the brain for me in pieces. I studied bioenergetics. I studied physics again. I studied music again. I was bringing all of these pieces together into one massive conglomerate, realizing that I was studying the same topic on different perspectives. Who are we? And why are we here? Asks the physicist. So they study physics. Who are we? And why are we here? Asks the theater lover. So they write screenplays and music, and they become a bard, and they try and explain. Who are we? And why are we here? Asks the philosopher. So the philosopher pulls apart the mind. But who are we? And why are we here? Asks the theologian. So the theologian sits down and starts ripping apart religion. No, who are we? And why are we here? Asks the musician. So the music lover delves deep into the world of music theory, studying frequency. They cross a lot of paths with physics and mathematics. No. But why are we here? Asks the scientist. And so the scientist delves deeper into the world of neuroscience and the brain and the body. But no, why are we here? Who are we? Who we are. We're all asking the same question. We are trying to define the self, and we are trying to define our relativity to what's around us. We are just trying to define the self, and we are just trying to define reality so we can understand our relation to it. That is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. Brownie points if you know what that is. That is why we are here. We are here to define the self. And we are here to define the reality. And we are here to define our relationship to that reality. And we all pursue this journey through what we love, what we're told it should be, through our politics, through our religion, through our abuse, through our generational traumas, through the universe, through our chakra stones, through the drugs we choose, through the television we watch, to the careers we study, to the world we examine. Well, I have studied all of those. And I lived inside the mind for 32 years and watched it run and operate around philosophy and the inner workings of the subconscious mind. And then I took my linguistic studies and my love for theater and oral tradition. And then I went on walkabout. 2019 happened. And we all felt it. In 2019, the electromagnetic field in the world just shifted. And every hippocampus that was just close to enlarging exploded. Every antenna in every brain turned on in 2019, October 2019. And the world changed. The electromagnetic field changed. And when you have a hippocampus that works like an antenna, a brain that's hooked up to that electromagnetic field, you feel it. So every light worker turned on like a sleeping hive mind. That is what happened in 2020. When we were all told to go home, sit down, and shut the fuck up. And we did. Well, many of us did. We went home, we sat down, and we shut the fuck up. Physicists came out with some information March, April, and May. They reported that the seismic wave activity of the world had changed and that the vibrational frequency that normally happens around that time was equivalent to Christmas Day for 3 months. Animals started to come back out into the world. It was as if the humans had died. And we all got to see what life would look like if we stopped existing. And when you have an enlarged hippocampus, that changes you, doesn't it? But there were no words for any of this then. You did not know what was going on. All you knew was chakras made you feel a little bit better. All you knew is you needed to get yourself a moonstone and an amethyst. You needed to get yourself some tiger eye. That's all you know. Because your brain just went off like a massive antenna. And I cured mental illness that year. That was when I finally saw the exact place in my brain the first time. And I was able to switch perspectives on cue. In 2019, my intuition got real loud. My intuition screamed at me, "Go to New York." So I got my passport in October of 2019. As a sick joke from the universe, it arrived March of 2020, 3 days after I got COVID. And all she screamed at me was go to New York. My marriage was imploding. And I'll tell you what it was. I know exactly what it was. It was that particular moment, right there in October 2019. My sister was living with us. We'd all been sent to our rooms by the government. March rolled around and I was already stir crazy. I had been studying the hell out of my brain. I had found Zen. I had been mastering meditation. I had been studying yoga and Tai Chi and karate and mantras and katas. I had started looking into wellness and infusing that into my healing journey, and then watching the data roll in as I observed my brain and my behaviors. And my sister was huge into astrology. And she was there every day to read something astrological, and I went, interesting, that's really accurate. Why is it accurate? Interesting. It's too accurate. It is insanely accurate. It is more accurate than the success rate of Alcoholics Anonymous. Interesting. Alcoholics Anonymous has a success rate of 12%, which means it has a failure rate of 82%. Astrology is more accurate than Alcoholics Anonymous. So I started studying astrology and tracking the consistency. I started to study exactly the influence astrology had. I started studying how the planets and everything shifted and moved, and how it affected me. And I wrote down that data. I quickly learned the difference between a good psychic and a bad one. I quickly learned the difference between someone who actually could read the energy, as I would start to call it, and somebody who couldn't. I am an energy reader. That is what you are. You are reading the energy. That is what you are. I call you ethereal walkers because you walk the planes of the ethereal. I get into that. I have all the words for you that you've been looking for. I'm going to wrap it down. We're going to take another 15-minute break, and then I'm going to be coming back here. All of these movies, by the way, all of this video series is going to be uploaded onto my YouTube channel, so you can take a look at it anytime you want. In addition to that, take a look at the link below. Again, if you want anything, if you want any information, if you want to know what I have available, and I have a lot, click on the link below. Talk to me. We'll get started. I will be back in 15 minutes. Thank you so much, and may the kindest of words always find you.